What is up, guys, and welcome back to another video. I'm so happy you're here. Today, a little more energetic. I recently filmed a video, and when I edited it, I was like, oh my god, nobody's gonna make it past the second minute. It was very, very mellow, so I want to be a little more animated. I'm so happy you're here. Today, we are going to talk about important clauses that you want to include in your cash contract. To give you a little bit more background, my boyfriend and I, we are running a real estate company. We're focusing on wholesale, novation, creative financing deals, while he is the master in sales.
When you're there, you want to be sharp, you want to be attuned, you want to be connected, and you want to just be a ninja.
I'm doing the back end, so I want to share a little bit more about what I'm doing with you guys and hope that this helps you if you're pursuing a career in real estate or just generally business as well. I want to share with you guys more about business. To give you a little more background on me, I have a master's in law and I have a master's in business administration. I hope that you find some value in my videos. Now, to give you a little bit more background about today's video, I want to talk about cash contract in relationship with wholesale and real estate. If you clicked on that video, you are probably familiar with wholesale, so I'm not going to go too deep into detail. If you want me to make a video detailed about wholesale, let me know in the comments down below. In a nutshell, wholesale means that you go and find a property the seller is willing to let go for cash. Usually they always are, also for a discount. And then during a grace period, which is called the inspection period, which pretty much means that you can cancel the contract without any repercussion, namely losing your earnest money deposit. You then try to find a buyer for that property at a higher price as what you have it under contract with the seller, and then make the difference. Technically, there's two contracts to this transaction: the A to B contract with the seller, and then the assignment of contract, which pretty much means that you are selling all the rights from the A to B contract to the new buyer. Today, I want to focus on the A to B contract and what to look out for and what I highly recommend you guys to have in your contracts for your and the seller's legal safety. I want to disclaim here at this point, as with any legal videos, please seek advice from a real estate attorney. I did this work myself. I have a legal background. As always, these are just tips. I'm not going to be liable for anything you do with these tips. So please always seek advice from a real estate attorney. Make sure that what you're doing is legally sound. All right, with that being said, I think that was a lot. Let's dive into the most important clauses in a cash contract. I'm also going to explain to you guys why it is so important. The first important clause in this contract is inspection. The inspection period is the grace period I was talking about before. During that time, you are allowed to cancel the contract and not lose your earnest money deposit. And if you are in wholesale, you guys, your inspection periods are your holy grail. Inspection period is very important for you to have time to find a buyer and show the property to a buyer. I have it under inspections, where the buyer shall have the right upon reasonable notice to seller to enter the property and inspect, market, list on the MLS, and show property to third parties before closing date. So that gives us the legal ground to have other people, third parties, go and see the property, whether that is an actual inspector or a buyer. I also did include the clause that we can list it on the MLS, but my tip here is be careful. Sellers usually don't want the property listed. That's why they're agreeing to sell it to you cash. If they find it on the MLS for a higher price, you most likely have a problem if they don't know about it. So I would say don't include that if the seller hasn't agreed to it, because it's just going to cause you problems. The second part of the inspection, which is I have as contingency, is the inspection period. So it kind of goes into detail. And again, you guys are probably familiar with it, and it's probably in most of your contracts already. I just want to highlight the importance of it. You want to frame it in a way that you get your earnest money deposit back easily if you decide to cancel the contract, whether you don't want to buy or you didn't find a buyer. We have it here: must be satisfactory to the buyer, or all deposit monies will be immediately refunded and all contract obligations considered null and void. Again, just put that in there to be sure and safe. Then the last part of the inspection period, which is the most important one, is the length of the inspection period. Here's just a word of caution. You don't want to put an extensive amount of inspection days in there, because that's just not going to look good for the seller. All right, you want to do something that gives you enough time to find and show it to a buyer, but also doesn't make the seller annoyed or suspicious if he's not aware that you're wholesaling the property. So I recommend doing it 6 to 15 days unless you have a tenant in there or unless there's other reasons that justify a longer inspection period. The second clause I think people don't really think about, but I would always include it. You probably don't need that clause. In 99% of cases, I would still include it, and that is the risk of loss. Just pretty much states in what responsibility sphere the loss of the property falls in what time frame. Legal lingo here. To break it down, imagine that you are actually buying a property cash, and one day before closing you have, let's say, $5,000 in escrow. One day before closing, the property is being split in half by a tree trunk. No. Who is burdened with that loss? Is it you or is it the seller? We have it in our contract that if the property is damaged prior to closing, it falls in the risk sphere of the seller, and you as the buyer are free to go and get your earnest money deposit returned. Highly recommend you include it just in case, but that's all law, just in case. A quick side note here on another clause that's not super important, but I would still include it. It's the acceptance clause. So you want to put a deadline in the contract by when this contract needs to be signed by the seller. I think most of you guys are probably using online signature requests, and sometimes you send them out and the seller doesn't sign and then they're sitting there. You don't want them openly sitting there with no deadline. Usually it's not a huge deal because you can cancel the contract, but I still include it also to generate some sense of urgency. Next up, other agreements. And this is very important here in our contract because we named it that way, because we have the assignability and the transferability of our rights to another party in other agreement. Now, this clause is particularly important for a couple of reasons. First of all, the assignability and the transferability that I just mentioned. Second of all, you want to include that you can assign, transfer, and novate. By the way, I would include that too. Let me know if you want me to make a video about novation. Novation is a legal concept and term that describes full replacement of one party with another party. And it is interesting in real estate for several reasons. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you want me to make a video on that. For those of you guys who know, include that in your contract, novate. All right, so you want to assign, transfer, or novate any of your rights to a third party. Now, without the seller's consent, obviously. You don't want to have the seller have to consent to you wholesaling his property. I think most of you guys are probably familiar, so just mentioning it here, very important. I think even more important than the without consent is your full release from liability. You don't want to have nothing to do with that property once it's closed. So you want to include buyers shall be released from any further liability under this contract. And you want that from the seller and the buyer. I'll probably make another video of the assignment of contract, important clauses to look out for there. But here you should frame it like that just to be safe. Okay, we're moving on to closing costs. The etiquette, I would say, in wholesale is that usually wholesalers offer the seller to pay full closing costs as an incentive to sign the contract, and we do the same thing. We don't just state that the buyer is going to pay all the seller's closing costs because that's not fully legally clear and could lead to confusion. So you do want to list your closing costs. What I did is I looked at the Florida FAR contract, which is a standardized purchase contract for real estate here in Florida. I'm sure other states have it too. I went to the closing costs section and literally listed all the closing costs that are listed there for buyer and seller, and listed it here and said that the buyer is going to pay for it. Now, if you don't want to do that, that's okay. But then I would definitely include a part where you state what type of closing costs that you're not paying. And I say closing costs in a more broader sense, but still they could be considered closing costs. So I did include them as kind of negative keywords. So it's clear that we're not paying that. And we include seller's attorney's fees that could be considered closing costs if he's consulting with an attorney. So you definitely don't want to pay those. Recording and other fees needed to cure title. You definitely don't want to pay those because those could be code violation, could be any type of fines, liens, and you're not responsible for those. And HOA and other fees. So we have those listed because we definitely do not want to pay those. These are usually the responsibility of the seller. Now, you don't need to include taxes. It's usually clear that the seller is paying outstanding taxes and utilities, prorated taxes, so you don't need to include that, but I do recommend that you include at least negative keywords of what you don't want to pay. We're coming to almost the last part, and that part is time is of the essence. Now, the time is of the essence clause pretty much just states that both parties work timely and efficiently towards a smooth closing so that there's no undue delay, that both parties are in agreement to bring this transaction to a close smoothly and fast. One thing that we did include here to buy us a little more time is the last part, which reads, reference to days in this contract does not include weekends or holidays. Now, this is important for your inspection period. Let's say your inspection period is 8 days and includes like 3 days of the weekend. Then those 3 days are not included and actually added to the inspection period. So it's really 7 business days. The reason why we're doing that is to give us more time, but also because usually on the weekends and especially on holidays, it's harder to have our people go into a property, and do whatever we need to do. Inspectors usually don't work on the weekends. So we did include that in the time of the essence part to make sure to have a little more time in the inspection period. That's a little trick for you guys, so you might want to add that. And lastly, additional terms. You know that all contracts are just a blank and that every real estate transaction is pretty unique. There's always going to be, or most of the time, it's going to be additional terms that you want to include, like property to be vacant at closing if you don't want to use the tenant, or property to be cleaned by seller before. Whatever the case may be that you want to agree to with the seller, you can add it to additional terms to, again, add the legal clarity, or for example, HOA fees, or if you want to pay the seller's taxes, prorated taxes of this year, we had that recently. So you want to include that in the additional terms. This is it. Our contract is just 4 pages long, so it's not dramatically long, but I think the clauses that I mentioned to you are standing out to me as very crucial. There are other clauses, of course, but these are the most important ones. And I hope that this helped you. I hope that you can now go back to your cash contract, check it and make sure that you have all these important clauses and that you have more successful real estate transaction. I want to add as a little disclaimer at the end, I'm writing these contracts myself, partially and fully sometimes. My intention is always to make the contract legally safe and sound for both sides. So I want to make sure that the seller feels safe and has his due rights, and that we are safe and have our due rights. Always make sure that you have contracts that are balanced and not try to favor one party excessively. That is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I so appreciate it. Let me know if there's something else that you want me to talk about. I love making videos for you guys, and I see you in the next one. Bye bye.